Good morning, Zero.
Hello.
And others. Apparently, I didn't see that on the window, but I'm going to be lurky today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our December 13th edition of the TAC. Give it one more minute for folks to join and then we'll get started.
Question, Bob. This meeting forces everyone into a lobby and requires someone with authority to admit them. Is there any reason we desire to keep that, or can we flip that setting to allow any participant in?
I would defer to our esteemed OpenSSF operations team on that one.
Oh, it's technically possible. I can click the button right now. Do we desire it to be that way?
I don't personally see a reason to have a waiting room, but I don't know if there are good reasons from the foundation's perspective that they would like to have one. So I guess I would vote on getting somebody's input from the foundation. If they hack it and say it's fine either way, then we could just remove it and be done with it. But
I will send a note to operations and the TAC mailing list about that.
There appears to be no password on the Zoom link, and my guess is that's why there's a waiting room. For a while, Zoom bombing was an issue that many hosts faced, and so this is one of the measures that I remember when it became kind of standard across the LF. I'm sure we can revisit it.
Yep. All right. We are 3 minutes in. We'll go ahead and get started. Right from the outset, I guess, first things first, there is no TAC meeting on the 28th of December, so 2 weeks, or 27th, whatever, maybe it's the 27th that I mistyped the date here, but 2 weeks from today, we do not have a TAC meeting, given that many folks are going to be on PTO. So just an FYI, I believe the community calendar has been updated already, but if you have a personal copy, it would be good to make sure you've gotten that up to date as well. All right. Sorry, does someone have a question? It's just an echo. Okay. All right. So next on the agenda, we have an update from the Securing Software Repositories Working Group. And I believe we have Dustin online to give us that update. So Dustin, over to you.
Yep. Hey, thanks. So yeah, Securing Software Working Group is, I just sort of went through the notes since the last update to the TAC and picked out the highlights. So two of the main discussion threads that have been happening are one is around malicious projects sort of syncing on all the sort of guidance and policies that repositories have around what to do with malicious projects and sort of the different tiers of malicious projects. Like, what should we do if it's just a quote unquote security researcher versus someone actually trying to be malicious? No real outcomes here yet, kind of just trying to figure out what everyone else does and sort of figure out best practices there. The other thing that we've been discussing quite a bit is what to do with CVEs. So, ecosystems have varying support for like audits and integration with CVE repositories. And yeah, we just sort of had some discussion recently about, should we surface them on the public web pages for the repositories and that kind of thing. So yeah, some discussion around that. Again, like no exact outcomes there yet, but one thing that the group is kind of trying to move towards is kind of trying to set like not a global policy, but like best practices or recommendation on each of these topics, and then just publish it in our repo so that we sort of have a sense of like, here's what all the repositories do, and here's what we think is the best thing to do, and this is what we should try to work towards. So that hasn't happened for anything yet, but we're thinking about it. Some ongoing discussion about the shared repository help desk, although I think that went to the TAC and there were some questions and they haven't been resolved yet. So there's still some work to do there. And then the last thing is some folks from GitHub are working with us to put together this sort of mini manifesto about like how repositories should be stewards of a safe ecosystem. And it's some pretty high level objectives that we're trying to get everyone to essentially sign off on and support and say, yeah, we're on board with this. I think the ultimate goal here would be to do a coordinated like publish of these principles, maybe via OpenSSF, and just have all the prominent repositories sign off on this and sort of say that we all agree to it, sort of as a gesture of goodwill, but also to sort of hold us accountable in the future to actually doing some of these things. Yeah, that's my update.
Any questions for Dustin?
Hey, Dustin, I have
Yep.
2 working groups that would love to collaborate with you on those 2 efforts. So if you have any issues, if you could, that you're working on the CVE notification and then the principles, just let me know and I'll route that over to the group so we can have dialogue.
Okay, sure.
All right, anything else? Awesome. Thank you, Dustin, for that. Next up, we had on the agenda an update from the GNU toolchain infrastructure project. And I see David on the call. So David, are you ready to go?
Yeah, David and my other partner here on, Carlos O'Donnell, who's coming in with a different link. So he's listed as Beatrice, but it's really Carlos there.
That's my daughter. We did coding online actually, and I renamed it for her. So
No worries. I just
go guides.
Yeah, that's awesome. But didn't see your names, Carlos. So apologies for omitting you. But I guess both of you go ahead.
Please. So we have a little presentation. Carlos, do you want to drive that or?
Yeah, I don't know if I can actually. Yeah, I can start screen share. Perfect. And am I sharing the right thing?
Shows as a blank screen for me. I don't know if that's
Yeah. I am screen sharing, but I want Zoom to share my. Is it only sharing the whiteboard?
Correct.
Yeah, I see the little counter in the bottom right-hand part of the screen, but there's no content there.
Yeah, hold on. I'm gonna stop share. I will try that one more time.
Want me to share? I can try to share mine.
Yeah, if you, I'm gonna say my portion is screen fine. Okay, I will share. Yeah, if you can share, Dave, that's fine because you've got everything set up. Yeah, perfect.
Yay!
Yeah, David and I here are presenting the Toolchain Infrastructure Project, which is GTI. It's an associated directed fund in OpenSSF, and the goal is to provide the GNU Toolchain components, GCC, bin utils, glibc, GDB, with state-of-the-art secure infrastructure for development. Current status is we have been busy presenting and talking with the community, talking with the LF core IT team to discuss the current services and secure services they're offering to other projects and how we can leverage the LF's core IT team offerings for the GNU toolchain. The key pieces here for us is we've established a services working group, which is to understand, enumerate, and produce an initial analysis of the services that the toolchain components are using, because in many cases, we didn't know exactly what services the toolchain components needed, what they were using, how those services impacted the sources we were delivering, how those sources were being delivered, how those tarballs were being delivered. And we needed to really understand all those services in detail for a number of those components. As many of you know, the GNU toolchain has been around for 35 years. So we've grown a lot of hair on the kinds of services that we needed and that we're using. So it's not just like a fresh project that shows up inside of some kind of forge and it's hosted. So for this right now, we've gotten 3 out of the 4 core projects kind of gone through this initial analysis of services. It includes things like, do we need GitHub commit hooks? What do those hooks look like? Where do those hooks call out to? What do those hooks have access to, and those kinds of things? So that is kind of, as of December, our current status is we are continuing to work on that initial service analysis. David, is there anything you want to add about this?
No, not so much about that as exactly as Carlos said, that we've been enumerating all of this and talking, having lots of presentations with the community about this to get all the details so that we can go to the LFIT with a specific list, and we'll say exactly the next steps and future slides, but basically to be able to enumerate all of this so that we know exactly what we need to ask for a proposal from the LFIT for. The other great thing is that also, because of the requirements of the GNU toolchain, GNU project FSF communities to use a free software-based meeting platform, we worked with the LFIT to create a BBB, which is a big blue button service for this. So this is actually stood up now, available for not just the GNU toolchain, but for any of the projects within the LF and OpenSSF umbrella. So that's now available, and Carlos did some great testing, great work. So it's now with the glibc community for patch review. We're also going to plan to start using that for office hours for the GNU toolchain for greater, more frequent communication with the community. So we're working on that. That was a great resource from and great help from the LFIT for that already, to be able to provide that sort of infrastructure for the GNU toolchain to use to be compliant with the expectations of the GNU community. Second is that we're also starting discussions with the OpenSSF and leadership about, and I mean, part of this conversation with the TAC, we'll get to that again later. I have a question for you guys about the funding and what the interim funding is going to be for next year to bootstrap the GTI project, as well as the future of funding. I don't know, Carlos, you want to talk about the key objectives?
Yeah, so CY22 is about enumerating the services we use and looking at them from a security perspective and from the perspective that we take with kind of, you know, OpenSSF and some of the other proposals here. So we want to complete that analysis, and then we want to begin working through the process of what would it take for LFIT to provide services in transitioning services. That involves a couple of steps here that we would like to see happen in CY23. The deeper goal behind a lot of these key objectives is about separating services that the key infrastructure parts of the secure supply chain are using. So the services aren't co-located on one machine, so that we have distinct machine for the services. So the services are hardened. So the services we're providing our developers are something that that they can know are being run in a very specific way, or that we have paths for people who are responsible for those services to be able to go and talk to them. And I think the office hours are like an interesting small step, because when you think about like talking about security and talking about changing your developer's mindset, having those office hours and being able to meet with like senior developers and just talk to anybody in the community about the directions we want to go in is important for changing like the social aspects of what developers are expecting from the community and what I'm expecting. Like, I mean, for me, like it's taken years to even move some of the core communities to, you know, reviewed by tags, to say another human's actually reviewed these patches and moving to providing some level of attestation for 1 or 2 humans have reviewed these patches is going to take a lot of like just discussing in the community. So, but for us, key objectives here: finish reviewing the services and move forward on service migration to services that we have. That's going to require funding approval by the GTI board, and it's going to require funding approval by our supporting backing sponsors. So, David, you want to go to the next slide, which is, I guess, our question.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to follow up on this, is that exactly as Carlos said, you know, about attestation, the other sorts of best practices that all of this infrastructure will provide us. We're trying to find a balance. We don't necessarily want GTI to be this you know, sandbox for every single experiment of security and tooling, but we do want to be able to implement, deploy the best practices for security to ensure that GTI, that the GNU toolchain as a foundational layer in the ecosystem for Linux and the cloud is able to you know, provide that highest quality and is able to remain a trustworthy component in this entire stack. So the question that we actually have for the TAC is you know, as Carlos mentioned at the beginning, the GTI is an associated directed fund, which is, it has its own, will have its own board and its own funding. And we're trying to understand, and we're working with Brian and the OpenSSF leadership as well, but wanted to get some feedback. I mean, in addition to any other questions, I don't know, maybe I should pause now if there are any technical questions from the OpenSSF TAC about the information that we presented so far.
I mean, maybe one question. So this was a good overview of the process for how you get to the requirements. Do you have any requirements identified yet that like are things that you need to work on, or is that still all up in the air?
Well, I mean, we know what the basic infrastructure is, and previously had conversations with LFIT about that, and a presentation about the infrastructure that LFIT already provides for the Linux kernel. So many of those are similar, and that's also why we think that LFIT is a great partner for this, is things like GitLite, mailboxes, other, you know, basic infrastructure that for, you know, mailing list, you know, Bugzilla, and how, you know, Bugzilla is going to be maintained in the future, and what sort of services GTI and the GNU toolchain will utilize. But what we're going to is now this next level in understanding exactly how the pieces are hooked together. You know, the mailing, not just the hooks for Git, but the hooks of, okay, a mailing list mention automatically triggers this, and Bugzilla mention triggers that. How are the pieces connected together? Oh, we've got this Moin wiki. We got, you know, we got a bunch of pieces sort of strewn. Oh, we didn't know that this link still exists. This was still running in the background. So we're trying to enumerate exactly what we currently have in terms of how it's implemented, the technology that we're currently using to then extract out what are the services that we need, and then decide, okay, we aren't planning to just do a lift and shift. We're not just going to run the existing infrastructure on LF, but okay, here's how things are working now. These are the services it requires and how they're connected together. Now we need to architect with LFIT or get a proposal from them of how those services will work in detail, both in long term and how we transition. I mean, if we got Bugzilla working, how do we move those pieces over? So it's that level of detail that we're working on.
Is it fair to say you haven't enumerated any security outcomes from this project?
We have not yet enumerated the security outcomes because we're doing service enumeration. But as soon as you do service enumeration, some things become immediately clear. So I'll give a concrete example. We have to stop running git commit hooks. We run a ton of Python in a git commit hook, for example, and it has access to the entire repository. And to audit that is incredibly difficult. We need to move to a web-based callout for a lot of our git commit hooks, which means re-architecting the way in which the projects expect to get notifications for commit services. And some of this seems really trivial, especially if you're working in larger forges, but it is a different process when it comes to using a standard fully distributed model like the Linux kernel does. And so a lot of what we do follows and mirrors the best practice that the kernel community is doing. And in some of these cases, we're going to have to change and re-architect the way we do notification for like commit pushes. Direct pushes, because in the case of the GNU toolchain, developers have direct access to the repository. They're doing direct pushes to the repo, and we need semi-reliable notifications for those direct pushes. So that's definitely a security thing that is immediately visible to me when we look at the service enumeration. Does that begin to answer your question? I think in CY23, we're going to start to drive towards those recommendations.
I mean, I appreciate the answer, but I think the type of security recommendations I was expecting to hear about in this were around security benefits in the GNU toolchain, not in the developer environment for GNU developers. And maybe I'm just out of alignment on that. I look to the TAC folks, but certainly I think that would be the thing that I would most appreciate is, mitigations for folks that use GCC so that the products that they build are more secure as opposed to just the supply chain outcomes?
That is a great question. So there's two aspects to this, and GTI's focus is on ensuring today from a secure supply chain that the developers of the GNU toolchain have everything that they need to securely develop the compiler, whose features you're then going to rely on to actually implement your applications. In fact, at Black Hat USA, I gave a full talk on GNU toolchain security. I can probably even provide a link to the talk where we talk about the distinct aspect that you're asking about, which it is different from GTI. GTI's focus is on secure supply, providing the security that the developers of the GNU toolchain need, and then they're going to work on the components that you're going to use to develop your application securely.
Cool, thank you.
No problem. David, do you want to say anything about that? It's just two distinct focuses. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. No, thanks. Excellent answer. You covered it well. I just want to make sure. Any other technical questions before our question back to the TAC?
I see Ava has their hand up.
Yeah, just a small one. I think Justin's question was great. Building from that, one of the cognitive gaps I often see folks have that have come into doing open source in just the past 5 or 10 years is they've only used forges. They're not familiar with the distributed model that I grew up with that y'all are using. Is there I would love to see the knowledge you are gaining as you go through and enumerate these service security issues and service transformations you're doing. I would love to see that knowledge shared out to several of the working groups in the OpenSSF. It reminds me a bit of the white paper we talked about 8 months ago or so, the penumbra of open source. All the open source projects that are outside of forges. How can we take this knowledge and incorporate it into the recommendations other working groups are producing for projects that aren't on forges?
No, that's really great, Ava. No, thanks very much. I mean, that's you know, we're in the midst of all of this, but I completely agree that that's a great information, and I guess Carlos and I and the GTI TAC will add this to our list of deliverables. I mean, this is definitely something that we can work on as a group to, as you said, you know, summarize this experience and have that as a you know, what lessons learned, or what, you know, what we determine. As you said, there aren't, other than the Linux kernel, which is almost as old as the GNU toolchain, there are, you know, not a huge number of projects, you know, from you know, that this our era, I mean, the era of the GNU toolchain.
And yet the ones that are still around are really critical and important.
Exactly.
And there's a handful of them.
Yes, and you know, as we've discussed before, and part of the delicacy of this transition is that, I mean, there are lots of projects, but in addition, the GNU toolchain also has this, you know, responsibility to the FSF and free software and the GNU project. So that's yet another as a delicate negotiation that we're doing about how, you know, that transition to be compliant with the expectations of the free software communities. But I completely agree. Definitely, we'll have a very good debriefing at the end of this.
Great, thank you.
So let's see. Any other questions about this? Or any other hands raised?
Yeah, I have one, but go ahead. Go ahead
Okay.
and finish. Yeah.
Well, it's just the main thing that we wanted to reach out to the OpenSSF TAC was about funding. I mean, there still is a lot of evolution about how ADFs, these associated directed funds, are actually going to operate. And as you know, within the OpenSSF, but with their own boards and their own funding, what we're considering or strategizing about is to utilize the existing OpenSSF members and the funding contacts for creating this ADF subset, as opposed to starting from scratch or going with our own context, because there's a lot of overlap in the purpose. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we are an ADF within the OpenSSF or associated with the OpenSSF, and that there already is a you know, very large and esteemed governing board, and you know, with major membership and funding that already exists for the OpenSSF, and existing, you know, funding sources and the funding structure within the corporations that are already funding OpenSSF, as opposed to, I mean, we think that it's more effective, and we wanted to get the feedback from the TAC and how, if they had any suggestions how to proceed, but to go to the existing OpenSSF members and their funding, as opposed to appearing that we're coming with this, you know, through separate channels, which I hypothesize are going to end up in many of the same funding organizations that currently fund the OpenSSF, and look like they're sort of double dipping or separate, you know, tin cupping, and that it would be better to, I mean, we were suggesting, Steve, I mean, this is obviously, I mean, or I don't know if this is for the TAC or for the governing board, but possibly some sort of a checkoff on the OpenSSF membership renewals and funding, and associate it that way, as opposed to having a completely orthogonal request process and funding process. Or just if there's any other suggestions or ideas from the TAC about, you know, I know this is, you know, not necessarily an expected question, but just if there's any thoughts, or I mean, now or later on, about the best way for ADFs to operate with in conjunction with the OpenSSF for funding.
Yeah, I guess to quickly throw in my comments, and then we'll see. Brian's got his hand up as well, so we'll try to. You know, I want to make sure that we're cognizant of time for the meeting too. I would kind of echo to Justin's comment. I think a lot of the work that you're doing is certainly worthy and good to you know, to the cause. I guess what I'm trying to tease apart is the other efforts that are already underway within the OpenSSF. So projects like Salsa or S2C2F, or the various other best practices guides that we're publishing. I guess it would be great to have a tighter story around how those efforts are complementary, and how you're deriving benefits from that work, as well as helping to push those out into your specific ecosystem. having it sit simply as a directed fund and saying, hey, this is good for this ecosystem where we don't see a lot of that cross pollination, I guess makes that a little bit hard to either externally sell a narrative that aligns with the rest of the asks that we're making of our members around funding and operations and support. And I guess that's the part that's not coming through to me here. Carlos, yeah, happy. Yeah, and I know we can certainly, take that onto a mailing list or whatnot. But I guess it's that essence that I guess I'm missing in order to give meaningful feedback around a strategy here around how best to approach that, because we are, as we'll talk about a little bit later in the meeting, ramping up a lot of efforts to help kind of unify and drive real focus next year. And so I don't want this to the work that you're doing to underutilize and be underappreciated or miss an opportunity to drive even deeper collaboration. So I guess that's the part that I'm struggling with a little bit.
Sure, Bob. Sorry, I didn't mean to say we can take this offline. I meant to say the slides for this doc you can present offline.
Oh, sorry, it's okay.
But when it comes to things like salsa, like I was heavily influenced by Google's approach to salsa when I started trying to get reviewed bys, which is 100% coverage of core runtime patches reviewed by at least one other human. It is a huge social problem that also needs some level of automation. I would love to move in a direction where we had 2 humans reviewing patches and doing those kinds of things, and attaining, like, I think that's like salsa is always in the back of my mind as something like, how can we improve things and move along that axis where we're getting more reviews and we have more confidence and we're reducing risk further upstream. It is something we can talk about, and we're not talking about it now because, as kind of we alluded to, there's 2 parts here. There is the core infrastructure pieces, and then there's the like social changes that have to happen in the developer community, and they're distinct enough that we don't talk about them together. But you're not wrong that from an infrastructure perspective, I could say, hey, we need infra and we need like patchwork to be the only thing that pushes patches, and we need to see +2 reviewed by tags before a patch can be pushed, kind of thing, a la Garrett, for people that know Garrett or may not want to use Garrett. Or we need some other process. We need attestation, and the attestation tooling needs to say there's at least 2 reviewed bys before it says that it's okay to push that patch locally if your tooling is sitting on top of Git. Is that the kind of story that you're thinking we could sell, like the pieces of toolchain infrastructure that are somehow related to the best practices?
I think salsa is a great example of it, but I don't think it's comprehensive of everything that we're doing within the OpenSSF. I mean, Probe and we have a couple different working groups focused on best practices and vulnerability disclosures. Looking at how could we, a lot of that, again, the community is probably doing already, but is there a gap analysis that can be done and reinforcing some of the work that we're doing and getting better collaboration between the GNU teams and those efforts, I think would certainly be desirable. So it's kind of like, how do we take GTI, which, and apologies if this comes across as a overly negative connotation, I don't mean it that way, but kind of are associated, kind of focused on this particular problem space. The OpenSSF is alongside you, focused on these other things. Like, how do we drive a better convergence story going forward, such that it's not just, oh, this is the team that wants money to go off and do things, versus we're a good community member, there's brand alignment, there's kind of convergence across the entirety of what we're doing. I guess salsa is just an example of that, but what I would love to kind of see more holistically is kind of if we're doing things that aren't aligned for whatever reason, that's fine, but making sure that we are doing the diligence to say, is there opportunity for us to be supporting even more, so that the funding proposals don't come across as death by 1,000 cuts to all of our members, that we have a coherent plan, that we're pulling that together. Sounds like we're already starting to build that, but I would just urge you to and all of us to think about ways that we could drive a more aligned strategy between the 2 groups.
Yeah, and so David and I have been considering like a 1-page, and this is something we talked through with OpenSSF leadership, a 1-page leave behind where we talk about in as high level a way as we can. And I think Brian's alluded to this in the chat, which is we don't even have the infrastructure in place to be able to start adopting the kinds of things that OpenSSF has. So when we improve that, we'll be able to go in that direction. So a 1-page leave behind for you even today would be, we're going to improve infra. With the improved infra, we can pick up improved security best practices. And so I guess the open question here still stands on this page of the slide deck, which is like the comment and suggestion then is our one-page leave behind, especially if we're going to approach OpenSSF members in funding context, should be how are we aligned or improving alignment.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's the tone I think I'm getting from governing board conversations and community conversations is, you know, obviously a wide problem space, but how do we drive, you know, leverage out of the things that we do build, and that if we have true community consensus that they are worthy and beneficial to improving the state of security, great. Let's make sure that we're getting as much leverage out of those things as possible, and not just death by 1,000 cuts across many different efforts.
Yeah. Okay, that's good feedback for us. David, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that's excellent. As you said, there's a lot of great technology that's being developed throughout the OpenSSF, and we definitely want to utilize it. You know, the GNU toolchain is a very important fundamental piece of the ecosystem that is, you know, it's like this, you know, I mean, it's a plane that's in flight, and we need to ensure that it's still able to operate and provide that to all the Linux distros that use it and everybody else while we're making these transitions. So it's not I don't mean in a negative way, but it's a tension between how we ensure that we're cooperating and utilizing all of this great technology without disrupting the workflow or becoming this just sort of a, you know, not just, I mean, again, not in a negative, but, you know, not to be a poster child of every single experiment. So we need to, you know, try to find out how we can utilize all of this best practices, and again, with the infrastructure to utilize that, but not, you know, add the, you know, too much of an experimental leverage to test out, you know, and any and all potential security tooling with the GNU toolchain. We can do that on the side, or, you know, I mean, you know, create another branch, or you know, but there's a limit to the bandwidth that the toolchain community itself has. So we just need to continue to collaborate and find how to find that balance, because we definitely want to ensure, you know, continue that close infrastructure tie, and ensure that that the GNU toolchain remains a, you know, respected and robust and you know, secure environment.
Yep. Oh, awesome. Thanks for the update to both of you, from both of you. I appreciate that, and it's been good to hear about what's been going on. Look forward to driving much of that collaboration in the new year. All right, next on the agenda, we have a couple items from Krobe, so we'll hand it over to him.
I will be brief. I may need to step away.
All right.
I have two topics I require the tax feedback on. First topic is a funding request. Back in days of yore, at the dawn of the internet, after the dinosaurs died and turned to oil, there were these things called mailing lists, and that's how open source communities communicated. Fun fact, those mailing lists still exist, and there are several mailing lists that are absolutely critical to the functioning and coordination of security vulnerabilities within thousands of open source communities. OSS security and the distros list in particular. Those services are currently housed in a country that is in a little bit of a geopolitical kerfuffle. And the request that I've been working on since April is for the OpenSSF to provide funding and assistance in migrating these lists to more neutral locations in the world, either the EU or potentially Canada. So I would like to have some time with the TAC members and a gentleman by the handle Solar Designer to talk through his proposal around rehousing these lists on new infrastructure in a more neutral location, and for the OpenSSF to provide support for that. The PDF I provided in the issue has the initial plan, and I would love for the TAC again to have a dialogue with Solar to ask him questions and to refine that and ultimately make a decision on if the foundation is interested in helping this critical resource continue on. I will not be taking questions at this time, but you may put comments in the issue or the email I sent to the TAC list. My second topic is the OSS CERT SIG has finished our first draft of revisions to the foundation's mobilization plan stream 5. I have put out numerous calls for comments, and my position is before any funding is requested by the governing board, I need some vigorous feedback from the TAC, and I also need the foundation to provide a path forward on how we can petition for funds if they still are in alignment with the foundation goals. So again, I will not be taking comments, but there is an issue where you can provide your feedback either in the TAC repo or in the OSS CERT SIG repo directly. PR is welcome, or comments on the issue. And I look forward to Mr. Bellendorf and the TAC to provide us feedback on how the SIG's plan proposal can move forward with potential funding consideration. Thank you. I yield the balance of my time.
I know you said you're not taking questions, Kurt, but I do have one question on the CERT review.
42.
Are you? Would it be appropriate to, I guess, are you looking for a formal vote of support from the TAC? And we can certainly do that electronically. I'm just like a call for go look at it versus are we calling for a vote that actually signals the TAC's level of support for this initiative? I want to make sure I'm clear on what you're asking for here.
Well, the framework of how mobilization plan projects to move forward is unclear. So I look forward to the advice of this esteemed body of procedurally how we do that.
Okay.
I first off would like people to read it and provide us feedback. And then I do want the TAC to either recommend that it gets moved upwards to whatever funding body that is, or they knack with comments.
Okay. Well, then I guess what I would move to say is like, let's use the next the time between now and the next TAC meeting to give you that review asynchronously and put an agenda item on the first meeting in January to call for a vote of support on this. I know it's not a binding vote of commitment for the foundation, but at least it sends a very clear signal to the GB relative to this group's support of it or not. So, all right, thanks for that, Krob. Next on the agenda, and if I can do this without muting myself, I will consider this a huge win. And for those that have been on Zoom calls with me lately know that this, I struggle with this apparently. Let's see if we can do this. Do folks see my screen and still hear me?
Yes.
Awesome.
Huzzah!
I did it right this time. Awesome.
Yay.
So I threw together a couple slides, put a link in the meeting notes for this. There's been a variety of dialogue going on in the context of, year-end planning for the foundation, as well as amongst TAC members in various working groups and other forums around kind of the state of the state, what's working, what's not working, things we need to accelerate, things we need to maybe change. And I wanted to provide maybe a synopsis of many of those conversations here and open it up for time period of getting thoughts and perspectives from this audience. As we think about kind of how the group is going to, wants to evolve, I think there's a general attitude of a lot of great work has been going on within the foundation. There's obviously the looming enemy of threats are at the door, and unfortunately, if you look out the window, there are more and more threats day by day. So I think there's a broader notion of we need more from the OpenSSF, not in the sense that we're not doing the right things, but frankly, the velocity needs to improve and the coverage needs to improve. And so as we think about the body of the TAC, we're chartered to oversee projects and working groups and what the formal charter defines as technical initiatives. I think the TAC needs to continue that work in 2023. But as we've been having many dialogues with, again, individual members, governing board conversations, subcommittees, all of those sorts of venues, I think that there's been we've even talked about it here in the context of defining a technical vision for the foundation. And I think we have published a draft PR that many of us have collaborated on that helps to kind of crystallize much of the activity and the grouping around it. But I think there's an opportunity for the TAC to get more opinionated and to actually publish documents that say what our opinion is around how can we take the ecosystem in a stronger direction. Now, that being said, documents don't solve security challenges. It's actual implementation, it's actual adoption in communities, and the OpenSSF has to stand ready and actually put, resources, both, people, money, tools, all to bear to ultimately drive this outcome. But I think from where all of the feedback sources that we're seeing, I think we're missing what I'll characterize as a North Star in a sense of we have many different efforts, many of them document kind of what are the best practices at a very technical level, but how do we assemble all of these pieces together into more of a unifying view as to what excellence fundamentally does look like for upstream. And so in 2023, what I would like to propose is that the TAC help to curate and publish a more strongly opinionated set of documents. The first one would be kind of a more abstract, overarching, and again, terminology here is somewhat of a challenge, but for the sake of discussion, I'll call it a reference architecture that really helps to pull together some of the work that's being done under the Diagrammer Society, some of the work that's being done within the various working groups, pulling this together into a cohesive narrative that says this in the entirety is what the OpenSSF is delivering on. And there will certainly be gaps of things that we maybe ambitiously would like to work on, but we don't necessarily have the right project, the right SIG, the right community within the OpenSSF, or frankly, it may not exist at all within the broader ecosystem. But we need that guiding North Star to help us, I think, talk about the organization and where we're fundamentally going, as well as to help guide our decision-making in 2023. So if we have this vague, abstract reference architecture that helps us kind of say we're all going in this particular direction, there is the fundamental question that I teased out a little bit earlier around, well, cool, how does that really help anybody? I anticipate that we will create a set of derivative documents that come from that North Star document that frankly are more tactical in nature, that maybe apply to the intricacies of the Java ecosystem or the Rust ecosystem or the Eclipse Foundation or other peer foundations. I'm just using these all as examples, but how do we turn that abstract into something that's concrete, internalize and really truly understand the nuance of where that particular body or that particular project or ecosystem is at in its overall security journey, and then help to push that forward in more of a tactical plan. So I think we're going to end up with a set of N of those kind of derivative documents. And then I think finally taking a step back, we will also be able to then generate what I'm characterizing as a gap analysis document, which essentially hopefully will allow us to answer the questions around what are the critical things that don't exist that we need to go create. Maybe it's a better SBOM tool. Maybe it's a new utility for VEX. Maybe it's a new transparency log thing. Maybe it's a new widget for something else. I don't know, but like when we do this gap analysis, I think we'll be able to point out the things that don't exist that we think should exist, and then also the things that maybe do exist in the world, but frankly lack the care and feeding to actually drive them at the scale that we think that they fundamentally should operate at. So in the gap analysis, I think what we should be able to come up with is a actionable list of places where we need technical investment, we need monetary investment, and we need resources applied to ensure that we have a sound end-to-end view as to how do we help make upstream more secure. So in doing so, obviously that's a pretty broad mission. And I think one of the other things that has come out of many of these conversations, both in our TAC meetings here as well as in other places, is that the TAC itself needs more help. And so some of that help needs to come in more engaged community members and more engaged conversations, as we kind of alluded to in the GNU conversation earlier. But some of it, frankly, is also about being honest with ourselves. The TAC is a volunteer body of appointed and elected community members. We all have day jobs. In order to do this, to address this problem space in earnest, I think it's our collective view that we need dedicated staff from the foundation to help support and drive the curation of the strategy going forward. The TAC needs to continue to be deeply engaged in making the right decisions around balancing community feedback, balancing security decisions on their merit, and helping to curate all of this. But we need dedicated support for people that can drive the overall strategy, as well as drive the relationships with the critical projects and critical ecosystems that exist out there today. And making sure that, again, back to the earlier comment I made around leverage, making sure that we are truly focused on what matters and are trying to drive as much through scale as wherever possible. Our existential threat of security vulnerabilities exists, but frankly, we also are at threat of just dying by 1,000 paper cuts. There's no shortage of problems out there. And as an old boss of mine used to say, you'll die of indigestion before you'll ever die of starvation. I think that's a very apt kind of summary as to where we are right now. So having full-time resources that are, again, employees of the foundation that really can help to steward these things, drive a more programmatic approach to how we engage, I think is well overdue. The TAC, as I mentioned, needs to continue to oversee that work to make sure that, again, it's well grounded in security principles, but also reflects the intent and the desire of our own community, as well as those communities which we serve. And then again, the TAC should hopefully be able to use that gap analysis document to help drive our decision making around project lifecycle decisions, around how we make funding recommendations. Because if we may see a project that comes in and it goes, yeah, that's worthy, it doesn't necessarily fit into the strategy that we fundamentally have right now, we'll give you a thumbs up, but we're not really willing to take that much forward, more forward than that, versus no, this critically fills a gap that's a high priority for us. We think we should lean in on this as the next greatest thing. Having that document that helps to articulate what our current viewpoint is, I think is a key asset that we want to continue to have and use going forward. And then finally, I'll say that, again, the TAC needs to continue its oversight of the existing projects and working groups and SIGs. But I think there's also in some dialogue, I think there's an opportunity for us, as we've been going through the Diagrammer Society, there is some overlap that exists between our efforts today. And as we talk about our work that we're doing at the foundation, I think it's in the interest of focus and leverage, an appropriate time to start to think about, where do we have overlap? Let's be intentional about that. There may be opportunities to converge efforts and to consolidate things. That's not meant to say that any of the work that's going on is not welcome within the OpenSSF. This is more about leverage and impact and making sure that we are focused on the things that do matter, and we're not causing more confusion and more disarray in the consumers of our content, rather than being focused and clear going forward. So this is my last chart. Our goal here is to drive an outcome. It's not to publish an opinion piece. So while these documents, I think, will help to frame and guide our work, the documents themselves will not solve the problem at hand. We have to continue to serve as a foundation that hosts and support projects, working groups, and SIGs that helps to make the impact and to drive kind of a cross ecosystem and cross programming language perspective. I think you've heard from the securing working groups call earlier. The end user working group is also looking at this as well. I think we have brought together the right fundamental pieces to continue to drive the impact that we want to have, but it's this marrying of tools, services, education material, and a strong opinion that I think will allow our foundation to have the impact and the outcome that we're hoping to have, which is fundamentally a more secure world in which collaborators, contributors, and consumers of open source can exist and continue to generate value. So with that, I'll get off my soapbox and call for comments or feedback. I just see Justin has his hand up, so we'll go to you first.
I mean, my question, I think this is a great idea. Is the organization, I guess, prepared to shut down any work streams? Because we have a lot. I would even suggest we probably have too many for the size of the organization we have to make the type of progress we want to on the most important things, are we ready and willing to shut things down that don't align with the most important priorities?
I mean, I'll speak on my behalf. I think getting back to my point around convergence and shutting things down, yes, I think those things are on the table. In general, the TAC has the authority to archive efforts if we view them to be not aligned. And so I think in the interest of focus and scale, I think, yes, that has to be an option that exists. You know, I will say though that I think part of this is a fundamentally complex space. We are approaching it from a very unique vantage point, and so there is a tendency again to die by indigestion rather than starvation. So I think making sure that we have focus and being critical about where we spend our time is absolutely a part of this. But I don't want there to be a perception of, oh, we're going to go just start archiving things left and right. That's not necessarily the desire here. We want to be measured, we want to be reasoned, and ensure that we are a place where we are clear about what we're doing and that we're clear about how we're supporting that work in a meaningful way. So if we're doing things not particularly well or without particular impact, that's not to say that those pieces of work aren't necessarily beneficial to the outcome, but we're going to deliberately choose to try to drive impact and scale over breadth as just a fundamental principle. I encourage any of my other fellow TAC members to obviously speak up and weigh in with their opinions here as well.
I'll state, as the small group of us have been together, looking at the foundation, all the efforts, there's a lot going on. And I think this is a great inflection point for us to sit down and kind of look at. We do have some duplicative efforts. We have some opportunity to combine or potentially prioritize things based off of kind of where we are. And that may optimize the time of some contributors. We may find that where people are contributing their efforts, there isn't a lot of overlap. We don't know yet, but I think this analysis is going to be critical for us moving forward so we can understand where we want to focus things like the staff, like Mr. Wheeler's time. David can't be in every call. We'd like him to be more productive in the calls he does attend potentially. So we'll, I think it's a great time for us to sit down and kind of reflect upon all this. And now that we have the ability, we've started to capture where we are, we can start to make some informed decisions.
Well, thanks for that, Craig. Any other comments from the audience here?
I'll just note for the record, since the chat isn't captured in the recording for YouTube, plus ones as well from other TSC members, Abhishek, Dan, and Josh.
Yes, thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. So I guess the closing comment, and Amir, I apologize that we'll probably have to shift the OSTIF conversation to either offline or next meeting. This is also a call for increased engagement. I think I see many names on the invite list here, and maybe folks that are going to watch offline. We need help, and we want to do this in a community-centric way. It's very important that we get a wide perspective to this overall strategy. So this is very much a call for, as this organization continues to ramp, there's going to be more time required. And I think we're trying to augment that with some staffing from the foundation. But we will need to continue to have a vibrant community and an engaged community on the generation of these documents, curating them as a function of time. And so I certainly put this out as a call for participation. If we do have also upcoming TAC elections in the new year, and so if this is an area that you have particular passion about and want to help to serve the community, there's a great time and place to get involved. You don't necessarily have to be a TAC member per se. To engage in the creation of these documents in this perspective, but in general, I think the desire of the governing board, as a member, I'll speak on their behalf, is to have a larger impact next year and to make sure that we are using the breadth of the resources, the breadth of the talent, and the breadth of the money that we have available to us to drive a meaningful improvement in the upstream posture. And so I think we've built a good foundation already for activities and projects and working groups. I think we want to continue to enhance that and to scale the impact that we have. But it's obviously comes with a critical dependence on the community itself and making sure that it's not one person's agenda, one person's idea, that it truly represents the spirit of many of the folks that are involved here. So with that, I will note that we've got about a minute left. Any other final comments on this topic? Otherwise, we can go ahead and close today's meeting. Once, twice, sold. Well, I appreciate everybody's time today. Appreciate your engagement on the various topics. Look forward to hopefully taking a little time off here over the next couple of weeks. For those of you that will be taking time for holidays, certainly hope you get some rest and look forward to reconvening in the new year. So thanks, everybody. Take care.